unlock the jukebox. I wanna hear some Jones. My heart ain't.
On a cold New Year's Eve, in a town most people can't find on a map, a 16-year-old boy lost the two people who meant the world to him. What followed wasn't just grief, it was transformation. He didn't speak through headlines or interviews, he spoke through a guitar. And with one heartbreaking song, he captured a nation's attention. But this isn't just a story about loss. It's about resilience. It's about a boy from Addis, Louisiana, who turned personal tragedy into a voice that's now shaking the walls of American Idol. You've seen the performances, you've heard the voice, but the story behind John Foster? That's the part the cameras didn't catch, until now. In the quiet corners of Addis, Louisiana, population just over 5,000, a boy was quietly crafting the foundation of a story the world wasn't ready for. John Foster wasn't your average small-town teenager. While others chased sports trophies or scrolled endlessly through social media, John found comfort in a world decades older than him, wrapped in the twang of George Strait, the sorrow of Keith Whitley, and the grit of Merle Haggard. He wasn't just a fan, he was a student of country music's purest era. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his taste, it was his drive. At Russley High School, John defied every cliche. Balancing sleepless nights of songwriting with top-tier grades, he didn't just graduate. He walked across that stage as valedictorian. And that same year, while most of his peers were preparing for college parties, John was preparing for something else, a life where music wasn't just a dream, it was survival. Now a freshman at LSU, with one foot in the classroom and the other in the spotlight, John Foster stands at the intersection of legacy and destiny. But back then, he was just a quiet kid from the west bank of the Mississippi River, holding on to a dream bigger than his town could ever imagine. For John Foster, music didn't start as a career path. It wasn't about viral videos, fame, or chasing a record deal. It began as something far more personal, a lifeline. At 16, following a moment that shattered his world, John picked up a guitar, not for applause, but for oxygen. Every chord he strummed, every lyric he wrote was a battle cry against silence, grief, and pain. It wasn't about making noise, it was about staying alive. His songwriting became a journal of survival, and in that rawness, something extraordinary happened. The world began to listen. His sound, a soulful revival of neo-traditional country, stood out like a voice from another time. Warm, honest, and heartbreakingly real. It was more than talent, it was testimony. By 2022, the same year he started playing, John had already claimed the Traditional Songwriter Award at Schreff International in Germany with his haunting track, Someone to Sing To. He wasn't just uploading songs online, he was earning global recognition for writing lyrics that could break a heart open. And while most teens were still finding their voices, John was already sharing stages with legends like John Schneider and Doug Stone. For him, music wasn't an escape. It was the only place where the pain made sense, the beginning of something bigger than he ever intended. In a world obsessed with overnight fame and fast tracks to stardom, John Foster's roots have remained remarkably unshaken. Ask anyone from Addis and they'll tell you John's foundation wasn't built in studios or green rooms. It was built in the pews of St. John the Baptist Catholic Church. Every Sunday his voice echoed through that sacred space, not as a performer, but as a believer. Faith wasn't just a backdrop in John's life. It was the rhythm behind every word he sang. His music, no matter how modern its delivery, carried an old soul laced with values, humility, reverence, and a deep sense of purpose. That sense of grounded identity only grew as his local fan base transformed into something bigger. In bars and festivals across Louisiana, audiences weren't just hearing a young man sing, they were witnessing a town's pride. John didn't forget where he came from, and more importantly, his town never forgot him. Every performance was a thank you note to the people who raised him. Whether it was an acoustic set in Baton Rouge or a local event back in West Baton Rouge Parish, John's name always brought a crowd, but it was his integrity that kept them coming back. In an industry where authenticity is rare, John Foster didn't need to fake it. He brought his hometown with him, and every song was a reminder. This wasn't just about talent, it was about testimony.
It was supposed to be a celebration. New Year's Eve 2022, a night filled with laughter, fireworks, and fresh beginnings. But in Addis, Louisiana, the clock struck midnight with a silence that would haunt an entire community. John Foster lost two of his closest friends, Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, in a tragic car accident that left more than just physical wreckage. The details were harrowing. A local police officer, in pursuit of a stolen vehicle, ran a red light at high speed, colliding with the car carrying Maggie, Caroline, and Maggie's younger brother. The girls were killed instantly. Maggie's brother was left with life-altering injuries. And John? He was left with a grief so deep, it nearly swallowed him whole. Maggie and Caroline weren't just friends. They were chosen family, the kind of people who knew his silences, who believed in him before the spotlight ever found him. In the days that followed, John struggled for words, but then, alone by the bayou, guitar in hand, the pain poured out in a way only he could translate. That's when he wrote, "Tell That Angel I Love Her," a song so devastatingly beautiful, John would later call it the most horrific and most healing thing he'd ever created. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a lifeline. And soon, the song would take on a life of its own, becoming a beacon of grief, love, and resilience for audiences far beyond Louisiana. When John Foster walked into his American Idol audition in 2025, he wasn't just carrying a guitar, he was carrying a story shaped by pain, faith, and the weight of two empty chairs that would never be filled again. But instead of opening with his grief, John opened with generosity. In true Louisiana fashion, he brought Cajun food to the judges, a gesture that broke the ice but also revealed something deeper. John Foster wasn't chasing fame, he was sharing roots. And then came the music. From the moment he began to sing, the studio changed. His voice, raw, warm, and lived in, cut through the noise of talent show theatrics. It wasn't polish pop, it wasn't showmanship, it was soul. But the moment that would define his run didn't come from a cover. It came from his own pain. During the Top 20 live performance, John chose to sing "Tell That Angel I Love Her." Maggie's mother sat in the front row, and when he hit the final notes, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Not among the judges, not in the crowd, and not across the millions watching from home. It was no longer just a song, it was a communal moment of mourning and healing. John's grief had found its stage, and in sharing it, he gave voice to so many others who'd lost someone they loved. In that moment, John Foster didn't just perform, he transformed. When John Foster walked into his American Idol audition in 2025, he wasn't just carrying a guitar, he was carrying a story shaped by pain, faith, and the weight of two empty chairs that would never be filled again. But instead of opening with his grief, John opened with generosity. In true Louisiana fashion, he brought Cajun food to the judges, a gesture that broke the ice but also revealed something deeper. John Foster wasn't chasing fame, he was sharing roots. And then came the music. From the moment he began to sing, the studio changed. His voice, raw, warm, and lived in, cut through the noise of talent show theatrics. It wasn't polished pop, it wasn't showmanship, it was soul. But the moment that would define his run didn't come from a cover, it came from his own pain. During the Top 20 live performance, John chose to sing "Tell That Angel I Love Her." Maggie's mother sat in the front row, and when he hit the final notes, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Not among the judges, not in the crowd, and not across the millions watching from home. It was no longer just a song. It was a communal moment of mourning and healing. John's grief had found its stage, and in sharing it, he gave voice to so many others who'd lost someone they loved. In that moment, John Foster didn't just perform, he transformed. While John Foster's name was lighting up TV screens and trending across the country, back in Addis, Louisiana, something remarkable was happening. The entire town rallied, not just as fans, but as family. Handmade signs popped up in front yards. Storefront windows read, "We are Addis, proud of you." From Emma's Garden in Port Allen to the steps of the local town hall, John's journey wasn't just being watched, it was being lived through the eyes of a community that had raised him. But beyond the banners and broadcasts, it was John's family whose quiet sacrifices made this dream possible. When American Idol came calling, there was a crossroads: continue college or take the risk. For many parents, it would have been a tough call, but John's didn't hesitate. They pressed pause on the traditional path, knowing their son had something bigger to share, and that moments like these don't wait. It wasn't just a leap of faith, it was an act of belief. Belief in John's voice, belief in his purpose. And as the spotlight grew brighter, John never forgot who helped him reach it. Every interview, every performance, he carried their support like a second skin. Proof that behind every rising star is a village willing to lift them higher. The American Idol stage is a crucible, one that exposes weaknesses as quickly as it amplifies talent. For John Foster, every performance was more than a shot at the next round. It was a lesson in vulnerability, endurance, and emotional growth. "It's a one or done," he said in an interview. "You make it or you don't." And he meant it. Each week, the pressure mounted, the lights got hotter, the critiques got sharper. But something else was happening too. John was evolving, not just as a singer, but as a storyteller. With every chord and lyric, he stopped trying to prove himself and simply started being himself. Whether he was honoring Carrie Underwood with a subtle nod or standing still in the spotlight to deliver one of his originals, there was a newfound confidence in his voice, a quiet command that said, "I've lived this. I'm not acting." Behind the scenes, he leaned on his fellow contestants, calling them some of the best people you'll ever meet. They weren't rivals, they were comrades in a high-stakes journey. Together they laughed, prayed, and survived the whirlwind of televised competition. And as John climbed into the top 10, it became clear he wasn't just there to win, he was there to grow. Not for the judges, not for the cameras, but for every kid back home who needed proof that pain could be turned into power. Now standing among the top 10 finalists on one of America's most watched stages, John Foster's future looks wide open. But for him, this moment was never about fame. It was always about purpose. Through grief, faith, and raw talent, he's carved out a path that feels less like a music career and more like a mission. Every lyric he writes, every stage he steps on, isn't just for applause, it's for Maggie and Caroline, for his family, for his town, and for every soul who's ever felt like their story didn't matter. John isn't trying to outrun his past, he's turning it into melody. His music isn't loud, it's honest. And in an industry that often chases trends, John Foster is quietly setting his own. He dreams not just of albums and awards, but of moments. Moments that remind people they're not alone in their pain. That beauty can rise from heartbreak. That silence can be turned into song. And while no one knows exactly where his journey will lead next, one thing is certain. He won't walk it alone. With Louisiana in his heart, a guitar in his hand, and resilience in every breath, John Foster is more than a contestant. He's a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes. John Foster's journey is far from over, but what he's already accomplished is something few ever do. He's turned pain into purpose and purpose into power. From a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River to a national stage where millions now know his name, John never let tragedy define him. Instead, he let it refine him. He's not just a voice, he's a story. One that speaks to loss, resilience, faith, and the quiet kind of courage that doesn't need to shout to be heard. So what's next for John Foster? A record deal? A nationwide tour? Or perhaps something even deeper, healing hearts through the music he hasn't written yet? One thing's for sure, this is only the first chapter. If his past has taught us anything, it's that no matter how dark life gets, there's always a song waiting to be sung. If you believe in stories that matter, if you believe in artists who carry more than just talent, but truth, then don't just scroll past. Hit that subscribe button, share John's story, and be part of a journey that's only just beginning. Because voices like his, they don't just fade out,